Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, this is your mayoral thing. I've seen
Is
it on posted on Facebook, which
is
is
that
great.
nuts? So
Yeah.
the I do not have a governmental minded drive at all, except for in the heavens, right? Like, man, I rule and reign in heaven. I got it. And then there's this committee that was desperate for somebody to run for mayor because the time allotted to actually get your name in on the ballots had passed. So this is a write-in ballot, and this lady, she called trying to get a phone number, and she said when she heard my voice, she had electricity go up and down her spine, and she called the committee and said, "I found the person." and
Awesome.
and then they had to sit me down and tell me, we really think you're the one. And I gave them a huge scroll list of all my disqualifications of why I was not the one. and and then they said okay, and they were just communicating, and by probably about 5 minutes later, my belly just erupted with this, oh my gosh, they are talking about me, and it just blurted out. I was like, I am the one, and I was like, what do you say? Like, be quiet. um, and since then, God has been so faithful, like every day dropping these incredible ideas for the community, administrative, for the school, and businesses. And I know that they're all divine
Yeah.
from God dropping into my head, and just because we've entered into heaven so many times that it's actually outworking on earth, and I am just that of I am what it looks like because heaven is coming to earth, and it was not anything that I sought after. So it's pretty interesting to see what God is doing. So if I'm one, I can only imagine what He's doing elsewhere, because this I cannot be unique and special in the outworking of what He's doing here. I believe He's doing that throughout the earth. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean it's amazing because I think when you think of we tend to sort of spiritualize this stuff, don't we? It's like, okay, yeah, well, legislation, heavenly stuff. I'm doing the ruling in the heavens, and then God sort of actually, no, okay, now we've got to outwear this on the earth. It's like, it's got to be on earth as it is in heaven,
Yep.
and then you begin to God starts to do it. Not everyone is going to be called into everything, but when you are, as you say, you recognize it. That's the thing. It happened. It exploded on the inside of you.
It did.
Yeah.
Man, it was like a big burp. I was like wanted to pull back every word going, "No." Because I know my disqualifications. Like, I haven't been here long. I don't know the history, and um, man, and I go to bed early. What do you mean night meetings? Night meetings. Oh, that's just that is torturous to me. So, but
Well,
I
right.
believe it's happening. There's changes happening.
Yep. And if we can't affect change and transformation into our community by bringing a heavenly governmental righteousness and justice, because that's what you're going to bring into any situation, even the way you're actually going about it will come from righteousness and justice. You know,
Yeah.
and that in itself was a testimony. And so, yeah, great. So when's the whole thing sort of sorted out?
The ballots come out October 13th, and
Okay.
but we're mail-in ballots, and then the final tally is November 3rd.
Right. Okay.
So
Awesome.
basically, 1 month of campaigning, which is nice, short, and sweet. That's how, I don't like these year-long campaigning things.
Well, absolutely not. No. So, but, okay. Well, that sounds really really exciting. So, in terms of what you've seen, what have you sort of drawn out of heaven that's given you,
Man,
insight into it?
so many visions of potential, and common sense. The biggest thing is common sense, that to rule in this place. Simple things like we don't have a chamber of commerce, or um,
Okay.
just getting involved in the community businesses. That our downtown Main Street looks like a horror movie. It's just just even the business is going up to the council this week, and they will probably yoke them with so many taxes that they're going to have to shut down. So then we're only going to have 4 businesses on Main Street, and they just kill everything that they put their hand to, and so they work in a place of lack. So I see all these things that I'm opposite of, that God has given me a heart of abundance and vision and common sense, and I guess I'm supposed to share it with everybody else.
Well,
Yeah.
you got my vote. Can I send my vote in?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's
all that just, but the craziest things are these ideas that I would never have thought of, never, and they just, again, they're like little bubbles. They pop in my head, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the potential of that is humongous, and then I get so excited, and then I own it in my heart, and I I get excited about it, and I've never in my life felt this way. I flunked government in high school, literally, and history. None of those were, yeah, big D's and F's. Just so
yeah.
this is a miracle. It really it really is. I've avoided politics, like, yeah, take immunization shots for that, go and get your flu shot and your political shot at the same time so you don't catch anything.
Yeah. But when you look at it, the more time you spend in the realm of heaven, which is a kingdom, which is government and has governmental established courts and everything else, then you're going to actually carry the resonance of that. So you will be shaped by what you behold, and you're spending more time beholding heaven. Therefore, actually, it's that heavenly government that then begins to get released. And let's face it, you've got access to the all-knowing God. So he's got every possible strategy there is to bring righteousness and justice into your situation. So
Well, the
hey,
neat
you're gonna
part
have loads
is
of this stuff coming out, aren't you?
I had the scroll of disqualifications, and God flipped it over, and he just read me all the qualifications, and every one of them was because he can. Because I can do this, and I can do that, and I can do that, and since you're in me, we can do this. It's like, oh, and that's the if I step out of that mindset, then I falter. But knowing how qualified I am because of him, I am strong and solid and excited. So he's imparted all of that to me, and so that so now I just make fun of the disqualifications. I'm aware of them, but they don't own me. And now it's kind of funny because I know that I am qualified.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing of once we get our identity and know who we are as a son of God, there is nothing can disqualify us from everything that God authorizes to do. And you've received a mandate to do this, so that's why you can be confident in the authority that He's given you to release. So
So it
yeah,
feels good. It's such a new growth and step for anybody to have that manifest within you on earth, and it feels great.
yeah, awesome. Yeah, and when you look at it from the eternal perspective of God, we're always in training for bringing dominion and rule, and so there's got to be an expectation, and this heavenly training, because I mean all the stuff you were doing with the benches, and engaging legislation, I mean it's all part of the training process. And I mean let's face it, it's like you can have access to resources that no one else has got. You know, you know.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And a second update is that our bench of three at Mountaintop spoke for the entire time, which is Steve, Pam, and myself. And we got to address for the whole service the bench of three, what it is and how we do it. And at the end, we gathered as a group, even though it was a Seahawk game day. People stayed and we gathered together. I think there were, gosh, I should have counted. It was probably about 15 people that we went together as a body, a church body, and went up to the throne of God, and just everybody was saying, "Hey, I see this and this," and you could see everything that they were seeing. It was all of heaven. Like everybody was so excited because they're looking over here and they're seeing the provisions of God and then the worship of God, and we were all just actively in heaven. Like we were in every part of heaven and telling each other what we saw. It was amazing. So that was a good update.
Excellent. Yeah, and again, that gives confidence to others. Hey, yeah, wow, we can see, yeah, we can engage, and I think, see, a lot of people disqualify themselves for this type of authority because of the past and because of previous church. Well, I haven't got a theology degree, I haven't got a Bible college degree, I haven't got this, and some people got them, and I'm not knocking them, but a lot of people disqualify themselves because they haven't got anything like that. And actually, no, you just need to be willing and will take responsibility and begin to learn how to legislate as God gives you that direction. We don't start off from this, hey, we know everything, we're experts at this. It really is true. God is looking for amateurs in the new. And that's because we become dependent on Him providing and giving us the resource and equipping and giving us the authority. And that's so different from the old ways of doing it. And so yeah, it's an excellent testimony, and so it's really good just to see the progression from where you start, and it's like, okay, well, what are we doing? It's like, I mean, we've all been there. We step in and it's like, whoa, what is this? How do we do this? What's happening? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're starting to see things, we're starting to feel things, gauge things, and you start to do things, and then now you're sharing it with others and helping them to do it, which is the, hey, freely I've received, freely I give. Then other people now will think, well, actually, this bench of three legislative, it's not so difficult, is it? It's like they've made it simple. And they didn't make it as if they were experts and,
right,
well, we haven't got no hope of doing it. They just shared it as it is. We're all learning on the job and growing in it, maturing in it. And if anyone begins to take the place of responsibility as a son, even if it's just for their own life, then things will begin to change around them. So yeah, it's excellent. Really good. I love that. So,
and then if George doesn't mind, one more thing was that in our bench of three, just this last Wednesday, several different things, but one was we saw this really huge net, and we the perspective was that we could look back at Earth, and Earth was very small, but we had this net, and we knew we were to cast it out, kind of like in the book of John, where they're casting out the net and hauling in the fish. So, but the net is huge, and even though we're pretty big, all of the angels came and they grabbed it, and we threw it out, and it went through the galaxies and caught Earth, and everything was like this great. What we felt now is a harvest, and then as it went through Earth, it caught the wheat and the tares and everything, like it was this great harvest of everything, and all of a sudden we're like, wait, now what did Bob Jones said something about this great harvest in September of 2015 or something like that? It's like, well, I think we just saw that. Like we kind of stumbled into helping to cast that net, like it was pretty awesome.
Awesome, yeah. Because that's the whole point of the Joshua generation, is to be ready for the harvest that's coming in. And that's so important from where we are, is to be ready and be equipped in these supernatural ways. I think we don't want to bring them into some religious church system. We want to bring the harvest into the life of God, release them and bless them and enable them to go further and higher than we ever went. And that's what I believe is going to take place. We need enough of the Joshua generation to be ready for it, and enough places to receive it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what God is stirring right now. He's releasing the blueprints and the mantles from heaven to be storehouses and be ready for the harvest that's coming. And to operate from a heavenly perspective. And this is the difference. And we're in that place where I think we're going to start to see people stirred for this harvest, but also stirred to make sure they're ready. Because God is not going to release a harvest if there are no storehouses to receive it.
Right.
And so we need more and more storehouses, whatever you call them, new wineskins, embassies of heaven, cities of refuge, whatever we call them. Mm-hmm. We have to have more of them. Because if you think of that harvest is going to be, let's say, 20% of the population, what was 20% of the population around you? Well, that's the number of people that we're going to have to cater for. So how many storehouses do we need to take 20% of the population? Well, if you live in Manhattan, it could be quite a lot. If you live out in a rural area, it may not be as many, but we're still going to need them.
Yeah.
Because God wants to reach everybody. That's why the net goes out over everything, not just what we think of where we like to cast it. And so we need to be ready, and I believe God is stirring people. And I think there's just this thing out there at the moment that there's got to be more than this. There must be more than this, and people are being stirred to look for. There's got to be more, and I think those are the people that we've got to get hold of, and they're going to be the ones who then start to equip that which is coming. And I don't want to be in a place where there's no harvest because there's no storehouse. And some of those things may be groups of things that come together to establish something over a city or a region, and some may just be one ecclesia that says, we're willing, we'll receive the harvest. We're operating from a reflection of heaven, and we'll receive it, and God will honor that. So those blueprints, there's angels with blueprints and new mantles just waiting to release them. And we've got to reach out to encourage people to believe. You know, so many people have been in the valley, not able to see their inheritance because they've been under the weight of oppression of the old system. And that God is, you know, He's removing that old system authority, and people are beginning to rise up and see, wow, I never knew this was possible because I've just been kept under the weight of a religious system that I've been in. And I think more and more people are going to rise up and start to see my inheritance is way more than I ever thought, and cross over and go beyond the veil and start to encounter, so that they can begin to be equipped. And then, hey,
Yep.
you only need to be a step ahead to be able to help someone take that step.
Yep.
Um,
Love it.
so it's awesome. So yeah. So I really look forward to the testimonies of those that heard your testimony, then embracing it and sharing their own testimony, because that's ultimately what you're looking for, isn't it? It'd be great when more and more people operate in that level of authority and start to administrate it. So, awesome. Very good.
Well, I haven't met George before. George, where are you from?
Mount Vernon, Washington.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm in Kittitas, over by Ellensburg.
Oh yeah, sure. You are in the rural part of the Washington. God bless you over there.
It's 1,000 people.
Well, you're in the right place. I can tell that. That's exciting.
Very exciting.
Awesome. Very good.
We will be praying for you for sure.
Well, come to find out that back in the 90s, I have some dear friends that were here several weekends in a row and just praying over this little town. That was back in the 90s, and I told them what was happening, and they go, well, it's about time, because we've been praying since the 90s, and that they had already left their footprint here for this moment of change. So that's pretty neat to, you know, that you have to be confident that your prayers, even back in the 80s and 90s and in the 2000s, that they are just laying here waiting to be attached to something, I guess, you know, to be activated. So pretty neat.
Yeah, awesome. Very good. Okay. So have you got anything, George, you want to share? Or?
I was going to.
Mike's there as well, behind his avatar somewhere. So.
I was going to have you just address the journey we're on, where we get flack that knocks us off our course. We have to get back on it. Flack being the, you know, when doubt comes at us from other people. I ran into it about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and it was amazing that it took me a while to get back on course again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of that, the enemy is obviously wanting to hinder, stop what God's doing, you know, and, you know, reinforce the old systems and everything like that. So when the challenge comes on, there's a lot of people who just are entrenched in the old way of thinking, and so they think they're protecting and, you know, everything against everything new, and all these new things come in because, you know, well, it's all this and it's all that and whatever, and they think they're protecting, but in reality they're just cooperating to keep things the same, which is powerlessness in reality in terms of kingdom. And I think once you have to recognize that that's the enemy's scheme. So we recognize that here. So we have people making daily declarations as a shield, and so I don't really feel the flack personally. And, you know, with all the stuff we've put out, there's very, very little flack that we get. But I know when I've brought this locally to local leaders, they've rejected it, or quite a number of them have rejected it. But I don't take that personally, and it doesn't obviously create any doubt in me as a person, because I know that I know that I know because I've experienced these things myself. But the enemy's tactics are often to intimidate, to create fear, to create doubt or unbelief, or to just essentially stop what God's doing. And if he can do it that way by putting people off, and when I share with people and they reject it, I just don't take it personally. My testimony beats someone else's theology any day. And most people actually don't even have a personal testimony of what they believe, because they just believed it because someone else told them. And what I've seen is most people, when you begin to say, well, okay, well, how do you come to believe what you believe? Why is that your personal belief system? Very few of them have a personal testimony of God actually giving them any personal revelation whatsoever. They just believe it because it's always been this way. They just believe it because, well, prophet so and so, or that our church has always believed this. They just have no personal revelation, and it's sad. But those that don't have a personal revelation of something defend those things even more strongly than those that do, because they've been trapped into a belief that someone else has given them. And because they've got nothing for themselves, if that is shaken, their whole life unravels, because they've got no personal testimony of anything to base it on. So they're basing a lot of things on what they've heard someone else say, or what our traditions are, and so they use that, and they're quite hostile sometimes. So, I don't know the particular circumstance that you faced, but Jesus said, don't cast your pearls before swine. Now, I know that can be quite offensive to people, but be careful who you share with. Only share that which God really gives you direct mandates to share. And I'm now much more circumspect in what I do. And I'm very clear, okay, no, God told me to do this, rather than I'm doing it. And when I'm in situations where, I don't know, sometimes you're in a situation where things begin to unravel or open up in conversation, I'm more careful what level I share with people. And I tend to stick to my personal testimony or experience that they can relate to. And if I'm in this sort of, okay, God wants me to challenge the old way of thinking, I'll try and do it from a perspective of somewhere where we can connect. So using a scripture which is very well known and making it a personal experience rather than a theoretical thing. And I've found that people respond better to that, but you're always going to get people who take offense, because you're challenging their whole belief, and it's usually because they're the most insecure people, because they don't have it for themselves. That's the problem in a lot of these things. People are insecure because they have no real personal foundation. So and they feel that you're attacking them. That's the problem. They feel that you're attacking them because you're saying they're wrong by introducing something new. And the reality is, you have to try and relate in a way that helps them see that they've also believed new things over the course of their journey. And that's how I try and engage people. In the, okay, do you believe something different now, or do you have a personal revelation or experience of something now than you did 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago? Yeah, well, how did that come? Did you believe that before? No. So in some way, you now believe something that you didn't believe once. So maybe what I'm sharing with you now may be one of those other things. But you may not believed it, but doesn't make it not true. And so for that is trying to open up the possibility for someone that there is progressive things that God is unveiling and revealing, rather than it is all set in concrete and nothing can change.
We're having quite a bit of, at least in my little world, feedback, flashback from that deal with Jason Westonfield.
Oh yeah, the Bill
And
Johnson issue. Yeah,
that's kind of sweeping back on us now. It was interesting. This thing that came against me didn't undermine my personal thing, what I'm doing, or even my confidence that it's true, but it stopped my ability to go in. There was something that just kind of hit me that closed that portal. I had to open it up again. I had to get back in. So, I'm standing. I mean, I know how I'm walking, and I know what we're doing is the leading of the Lord for me. But that thing that came back through this whole thing, and it's people close by that affect you differently. It's not strangers, obviously.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, that whole issue is polarized things, and in a sense, their handling of that situation has set a precedent for denouncing and criticizing and publicly doing things, which is very, very dangerous now. And you always have those that are very forefront of what God was doing end up opposing what God is doing now. And so I honor Bethel for their bringing us to the point of the Jordan, but now they won't cross, and they're hindering others crossing.
Wow.
And so you have heaven invading earth as a concept of an open heaven, but it's all one way. It comes from heaven to here rather than us going there and administrating there and bringing things here through our lives. And so it's got us right up to the crossing, and now it's like, but you don't want to go over there. And unfortunately, that has begun to reverberate, and those that are further away from that tend to be even more vehement in their opposition. And unfortunately, that has taken place. That precedent has been set. What we must do is to administrate it to ensure that we're not affected by it or operating in it, and we just need to see people rescued. We need to call into the wilderness and be that sound, that frequency that carries a reflection of heaven and draw people out. And for some, that's not going to be easy. And I think, I reiterate the situation. I'm not making a judgment on what Jason did or didn't do, or whether he's right, wrong, or not. The issue is what operated through it. And what operated through it was, actually, we're providing coverings, and if people won't come under our covering, then we can denounce them, and that is a dangerous thing. And also setting their own biblical parameters to what is and what isn't acceptable, just like happened to them with the AOG church, which they had to leave because the biblical parameters of the old didn't fit into their new paradigm. Now they're doing the same, and that's the sadness of it. But others are then jumping on the bandwagon and then beginning now to denounce, as Gnosticism and various other things. I mean, and some, really surprising people, I would not have expected to have been on the wrong side of this line are. But we have to recognize that that's history, and we must make sure that it doesn't hinder us, that we're not going to be held back, and therefore I'll be on guard and put up protection to ensure that it doesn't close our access, because that's it. It's a lie that says you can't go in. But that in itself, coming from, as you say, people who are close enough to you to have access into your life, can have an effect. So we need to guard ourselves against that effect, and operate that way. And of course, once these things happen, we've got to maintain a right attitude, a right heart, forgive them, release them, bless them, and administrate the blessing and the light coming in. But it's not easy. It's not easy when you get opposition from those closer to you, around you, and it seems that the whole Bethel thing has set a precedent for a public polarization of these issues.
Yeah, I agree.
But what we want to see is that will actually cause those who God is stirring to recognize that and not be held back, and actually to say, well, I'm not being under this covering if you're stopping me going into what God is calling me to go into. So we have to expect that there are going to be people who see through this and recognize the weight of oppression that's being put on and then choose to come out of it. And we've got to be ready to help those people. Because I've seen this in Australia, in China, in other places where there's a Bethel influence, that there is resistance and opposition and criticism and judgment being made in a negative way. And we just have to be ready and prepared to deal with it, but it's out there, and I would say that they were the very forefront of, what God was doing, but stopped short and weren't prepared to cross over or pass the baton to those who were, well, I believe the spiritual authority has been removed from them. I don't believe they carry that spiritual authority for that anymore. And what happens when you don't carry spiritual authority? You have to exercise earthly authority. So those that have rejected what God is doing are going to get more and more, in a sense, stronger with their opposition and begin to control things more strongly from an earthly perspective because they don't carry that spiritual authority anymore. That's not to say God won't come and engage with them. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, he'll always come. Where people praise him, he'll always come and inhabit those praises. But that doesn't mean that he's going to give them the spiritual authority that they previously carried. And
we're having a repeat of every time God has moved, 60s, 70s, 80s. Here we go again with the faith movement, did the same thing. When deliverance came, when apostolic, when prophetic, one camp, it's just another repeat of that same spirit of rejection.
Yeah. For
what God has for the new, the ongoing revelation of Himself.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's the reality of this. If we're not in a place where we're willing to continue to be transformed and to change and to develop and ongoingly pursue progressive revelation that God is going to, it's almost like, do we know everything about God? Are we functioning fully in everything? Of course not. If we were, things wouldn't be the way they are. So we have to acknowledge and recognize that there must be change. If there's no end to the increase of his government, then there's got to be change to see that government increasing. And we don't have to see that as, oh, this is a terrible thing. No, this is just like what, as I said earlier, examples in our own lives where we've changed in the past. This is just another one. But as soon as you start to create a network of relational things which become structural things and then become a denominational thing, then you're in a position where you've become rigid and no longer able to contain the new wine. And a rigid wineskin cannot contain the flow of a new wine, and that's the problem. Once the structures take place that create rigidity, then you have to defend it. And once you create some sort of, now churches are affiliated to our movement, or they're now part of our global legacy and all those things, then you have to have some way of ascertaining whether they believe what you believe, if they can be part of what you're doing, rather than it started off relationally and it becomes structural. And then it becomes law, and then it becomes rigid, and then, well, if you don't believe this, you can't be part. And that's how these things develop. Nothing started off as a rigid, solid wineskin, old wineskin. It was started off new, and there was wonderful new wine in it. It's just it becomes rigid once you start to attach those things to it, and that's, I feel, what's happened in this situation. You know, but we just have to make sure what we're doing does not go the same route.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it keeps relational. It does not become rigid, and it maintains an openness and a willingness to embrace revelation that comes from others and from whatever God is doing or whatever source, rather than, well, hey, if God is doing something new, surely He would have told us first. Well, why? You know, actually, humility is, hey, I'll be willing to listen to other people, not just thinking, well, God will, of course, He'll have told me, and if He didn't tell me, well, I'm not believing it. Well, there's no humility in that. You know, actually, I have to be willing to find the truth as revealed in Jesus through whoever He chooses to release it through. And I'm not foolish enough or arrogant enough to think that's always going to be through me. You know, it's not.
You know,
So
we may have. I think we saw a breakthrough of this back in 48, 49, in what they call the latter rain, because they were going into the heavens. They were hearing sounds we hadn't heard, and yet the structure killed it. You know, I was in Pentecost as a kid then, but I remember the warnings and all the negative things. And looking back on it now, that was a breakthrough in this same thing God's doing now. Only it got, of course, slammed down. And we still see pockets of it and pools of it around the world, and probably more than I realize. But I'm just having that thought while you're talking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And you can see this all the time. It's that inflexibility that comes, and then the rejection, and it is really, really sad. But it's what happens when God does something new. You know, a whole generation rejected going across the promised land. Yeah, and I don't believe God's desire is that a whole generation has to die in a wilderness.
No.
But if they choose to stay there, then it's inevitable that that's going to be the result. Whether, not talking about necessarily physical, but in terms of the spiritual dynamic of the authority of that no longer functioning.
I had a young woman come to me this couple of weeks ago. I had said something evidently in a meeting that caught her attention, and she has been under the radar following you and Ian, and she asked me a question, and then after I answered it, she opened she said, I thought I was going nuts, but I was the only one. So I prayed with her, talked with her, and then I told her about the hangout, and I was going to ask you if there's any room. She would sure love to be a part of our hangout over here. So I just
sure. Well, in the day, there's only 3 of us here, today. So yeah, there's a little bit of room if you want to invite her. Just give me her Google Plus email address, and I can add her into the call. I mean,
okay.
This is a more, it's not attached to the Alpha course or engaging God thing. This is more of those who want to engage in this whole area, and yeah, no problem.
All right, I'll pass that on to her then.
Yeah, sure.
And give you the information.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, I have a question.
Hi, yeah.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good day.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the Truman Show, good morning, good day, or if I don't see it, something good night or something. I can't remember. But I've been, since our last hangout, I've been journaling a lot more.
Yeah.
And it's mostly just been like communicating from my heart about things. But I think it was yesterday morning, during some reflecting of a scripture, Psalm 23, I started thanking the Lord, from a positive affirmation for being my shepherd and all that. But it was while I was journaling. And next thing I know, my heart was taking me to the living waters, the river of life. And I was sitting there and I was drinking. But because I was journaling, it was pressed very slow. And at first it was fine, because I just, I'd write a little bit, and then what am I doing? I'd write a little bit, what am I doing? And I mean, and I'm not a fast writer, and I had to try to figure out what words do I use. And so it wasn't like this is something that's just happening right now. I said, it's like I'm writing a book, but I know that you do this, so you might be able to relate somewhat. Well, then I sensed Jesus coming, and I was started communicating with him. And that's where it got really kind of dicey, because I'm like, I sense he's saying this, but I went and got like a cup of coffee and then came back, and then it started interacting again. And my being caught in time is a terrible thing, because it can really mess you up, because it's like, was this happening? And so I needed to talk to you about it, because I feel like I'm to continue this, but it's like, how do I continue it when it's like, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, sure.
Or am I just again, is this just, because this is what comes to me. This is just your imagination. This is no different than someone writing a book. But I have to tell you that when I'm in the experience, my heart is glowing. I mean, I feel like the word resonates going all through me, and what I'm describing, I feel it happening, the living water flowing through my being, because of, and I think that's because I take communion, I've learned to absorb communion, not just take it, into my stomach. I see it going through my whole being when I take it. So that's what I was doing with the living water. But again, this is so all new to me. It's like I have so many paradigms from the past, what we're talking about, they just go, yeah, 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 in my head, when I'm doing this.
No, I mean, this is exactly how it should be. I mean, this is how I do things all the time. I journal my interaction with God, him talking to me, I'm talking to him, what I'm doing in the heavens, what's going on. I journal it all. Now, some of it, because I've experienced it every day, I don't journal the same experiences, but what comes from the encounter, God speaking to me, I always journal it. Or if I'm doing something or decreeing something from that place, I journal it, I write it down. I do it with my eyes open and engaging in the spiritual flow of it without, see, my imagination and your imagination is not a screen which just has visual images. It's the place where communication comes and we can discern it. So it's our discernment center. You're not making up that, it's happening and you are connecting with it, and therefore in the connection with it you are learning to tune in and then speak it. So yeah, it doesn't just stop because you stop. You can go away and coming back. I mean, I do that often. Sometimes I get up and go to the toilet and I come back. I do natural things. It doesn't break a flow. It's not like, oh, the spell is broken, so you just step back straight into it, because you're engaging by faith anyway. So it isn't a time issue with Jesus or with God. They're always able to connect with you when you connect. So it sounds like you're absolutely on the right track and the flow. And that living water, you are experiencing it. You're feeling it. You're sensing it. It is real. And when we talk about activating our imagination, it is just to open the door to step through. That's all. It is like the starter motor of the car. You use it to turn the engine over. Once it fires, it's running. You don't keep turning the key and using the starter to keep going. It's firing. Once you've once you've stepped into the experience, which is what you're doing by taking communion and then drinking living water, you're then in it, and what you're receiving is from the encounter that you're experiencing. You didn't make it up or try and make it up. You just activated it. So you activated it by taking the communion or thinking about the river of life, or just positioning yourself in the right place to experience God's presence. Then what happens. You didn't determine what was going to happen. He did. You just go with it and go with the flow of it. Journal it. Don't try and figure out what you're doing along the way. I don't figure out anything at that point. I write it down. I simply just transfer it. For me, I transfer it to my note, and therefore I've got it as a Word file or a text file anywhere on my computer. So I don't use sort of my own sort of paper and pen, but I don't make it up. I just write it down, and then later I go back and think, okay, what was it that actually this means? Because I've written it down, but I didn't try and figure it out. So I didn't try and stop the flow by getting my mind in the way. Now I've learned to control that, and now my mind doesn't do it at all. But it used to. I would try and figure out what it meant, and then it would just stop the flow of it coming. So now I let it flow until the flow is finished, and then I'll then go back and revisit it, and then I can use that to go back through it. Because it becomes a testimony. Once you've established it, it is now your testimony of drinking living water. Well, you can take that fruit of that testimony and go back into that all the time, anytime you want. Because now it's yours. When you might have heard me talking about it, well, then it was mine. You've engaged, and now it's yours, and now you can share that testimony with others, and then that can be theirs once they engage with it. So keep going with it. I mean, it sounds exactly what the flow is. It's not broken by stepping in and stepping back out of it. It's only broken when we try and get our soul involved, and that's where some of the the thoughts or the old things try and impose themselves on it, because they're operating through the soul and the mindsets that we have to overcome. And that's where I just if any of those things came, I'd take them captive. Take captive every thought and bring it into obedience. So get lost, basically. You're not going to hinder me. This is God. I'm going to embrace it further. And you'll find eventually that you just don't get any interruptions. But that takes some time. But the transformation of our mind, the renewing of our mind, happens when we start beholding this stuff. We don't have to try and get rid of the old. We embrace the new, and the old just has no room, has no space in us anymore, because we have no doubts. That's the more we've experienced the truth, the less any sort of lie. It's obvious. I know they talk about people who are trained in currency, counterfeiting. They don't give them counterfeits to look at. They make them get the real. So they're so used to the real, they're so used to what the real feels like, and when anything is not real, they just know it, because it doesn't line up with the real. So keep focusing on the truth and the new experiences, and you know then that's the real, and those things that aren't will just be like fall away. They just fall away, because we focus on what is real and what is the truth, and then those things will fall away eventually. But again, Psalm 23 is where I started most of my first meditations and experiences. The Lord is my shepherd. I'm going to lie down in green pasture, and I'm going to enjoy the quiet waters, and we're just going to hang out, and we're going to talk and share. And most of my conversations came from Psalm 23. I'm lying down in green pasture, the shepherd's here, let's chat. And then there is that, hey, there's this river flowing. I can drink of that river. I can enjoy that river. I can experience what it's like to be in that river, because, hey, he's with me in the experience of it. So, yeah, sounds really good. So yeah, excellent.
So George, do you have anything else?
I said, I only have one thing to say to you, Mike Lindell. It's about time.
Well, you know, I've had experiences, but it's like I forget them, and I don't have you know, like you said, things come, you know, that speak in my head, and I had no idea this battle was going to be this difficult. And like George said, I get opposition, you know, right close. That, you know, I don't think it's so much that this is wrong. It's just that why do we need to do it? There's more important things to worry about. You know, we have people that they need mentoring. We have to have classes that teach them how to have good marriages. And I'm trying to say, no, we need people to know the Lord, and He'll tell them how to have a good marriage.
Yeah.
You know, but we need to reach the poor. He says, well, you know, that's true, but God has a complete strategy for us that we could reach the poor, you know, in a way that we could never come up with. And so I keep going back. We need to go back to the source and find out what He wants us to do. And everybody says, well, we know what to do. We've seen other people do it. We see what works, and it sometimes is like, you know, going, why are we like this? And then, you know, I find myself falling back into the same patterns at times, because, you know, when you have a rut, it's the easiest thing to fall into. And God needs to fill in our ruts. That's what He needs to do. So we can't.
Now what we need is just fill them with water, and we can flow along them.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, you get that story of the dry riverbeds, and the prophet came, and the minstrel played, and the river came, you know, and watered, because it flowed along the riverbeds. And sometimes I think God just wants to turn things on its head. And I know where people are with those things, but when it comes down to it, is okay, do you want to copy what someone else is doing because it worked for them, or do you want to hear what God is giving us as a specific thing for us to do? And that's what it comes down to. You know, second-hand information from somebody else in their situation, which was different from yours, is never going to work. And how many books and manuals and everything else have been written on, we did it this way, so copy us. You know, I remember years ago, you know, the Bill Wilson doing children's busing in New York. And then you had all these bus ministries started up to try and ferry children in to get them into church. Well, most of them didn't work because they weren't what God told them to do in their situation. And although it worked there, it didn't work everywhere. Then you had cell church and all the stuff that was going on over in Korea and all those places, and you know, in the different places over there. And it's like, yeah, now we're going to put it into our culture, and oh, it didn't work. Well, because all we need to do is ask God, as you say, what is the mandate and the blueprint for us? You know, we have a great ministry that helps ministers into the poor because God gave it to us as part of who we are. I wouldn't expect anyone else to have to do it, and I wouldn't actually say, well, copy the way we do it. What you need to copy is go and hear God for yourself, because He'll show you what you can do. That's the principles that we're trying to help people to see, and you are. Look, we can go and God can give us direct what is His perfect thing for us in this situation. Why would we want to copy something else? Mostly because people don't want to spend the time going to listen to God. It's easier to read a book that someone else has written telling you what to do, because it takes away the personal responsibility of engagement and pursuit. Well, it's easy. Why would we need to? And I understand fully, because we've had the same questions. You know, and it's like, well, now we're functioning this. People can now see how it works. So they can actually see, oh, yeah, now we see, because there's testimony, there's history. You know, we've seen what happens when we do a court case. We've seen what happens when we do this, when we get legislation, what effect it has. But obviously it's taken time to build up that testimony, and when you're in the process of developing it, you do get all the, well, this is really complicated. Why do we have to do all this stuff? It's like, surely we can do, it worked all right before, you know, and all that. You get all that. You will. You just have to maintain, and don't get into an argument or get into even a well, we're going to debate this. It's just like, no, because this is what God told us, is telling us to do. He wants personal intimacy with us so he can give everyone direct access to him. And we're going to model that, and we want to encourage others to do the same. You just have to almost have a default, this is why we're doing this. And you stick to it, you don't argue it, you don't debate it, you just reiterate it. No, because God told us to do this. You know, this is what he's actually doing all over the world. He's calling people to come into intimacy with him so they can hear God for themselves. And actually, we're not going to hear God on behalf of the church anymore. We're going to help the church to hear God for themselves. You know, and that's really the new model, really. Everybody can hear God for themselves, but everyone has to be willing to take responsibility. You know, years ago, it was like church was expected, well, the leaders that faster, they would feed us, you know, tell us what God's saying, you know, give us a message, you know, we pay you to do it, so we expect you to do it. That's a lot of the attitude that's still there in a lot of people, you know, and there's an expectation that that's what the thing is. And I got to the point where it's like, no, I don't want to feed you. I want to give you a recipe. And then you can go away and make the recipe and feed yourself. And it got to a point where that was okay on the journey, but now that's not okay. I don't want to give people a recipe. I want to give people a list of ingredients. So they make their own recipe. And then they make it, and then they eat it. And then they find that they're totally fulfilled because they're eating the food that God wants to give them. So I'm not even going to give people a recipe. I'm going to give people ingredients and encourage them to go and make their own recipe. Because there's going to be some exciting new recipes out there.
How about this? Not even giving him a recipe anymore, going to the chef and having the chef teach him directly.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah. I mean, you're really going to get that. Absolutely. So for me, it's just like, okay, here's a whole list of things that God wants you to have, and he will give you the recipe for what he wants you to make out of it. And this is your life. You know, your life, your destiny is made up of God's purpose for you. You need to go to him to find it. You're not going to get it by going to the prophet or the apostle. If there are any sort of sense of equipping apostles and prophets, they're just going to point you back to God and teach you to go and listen to God and get it from God yourself. Otherwise, they're just setting up another system where you have to go through someone else to get this. But we're on a journey, and there are steps on that journey that we can help people take progressively. You know, it's very difficult to jump from the old into the new and instantly understand it or not have issues or problems around it unless you've been born into it. You know, and we've got some people here who've been born into it, and they don't have any nonsense because they haven't got any old mindsets. You know, we've got one of our bench of 7 who was born from our drop-in, got saved through our drop-in, you know, became part of the church, got married, had a child. It's just like completely transformed, and is part of our bench of 7. He didn't have any of the old because he didn't even know the old existed because he was born into the new, you know, and he just hears God. I mean, it's like, well, I just go and see what God's doing, and he's one of those people as well that God shows what the enemy's doing. So quite often he'll come and say, well, I've seen this stuff's going on. Thanks. Okay, great. You know, that's what we want, more and more people who don't have to be deprogrammed from the old. But of course we've got a whole generation of people who are needing to cross over, so we've got to be ready as forerunners to help them, you know. And that means there's got to be a Gilgal. You know, Gilgal was, hey, we need to roll away the reproach of Egypt and the wilderness, effectively, where you've been wandering around for the last 40 years. Now, hey, here's something new. So let's find a way of embracing the new. But, you know, it's not easy. It isn't easy. I mean, I can share the last 5 years of my journey, which have been progressively understanding these things, but there was the last 15 years before that led up to it, where, I did learn to hear God's voice and engage in the Word of God before anything else. That was a long journey, years and years of practice without much fruit, and no one else. I was on my own completely. I didn't even tell anybody what I was doing, because I don't think they would have understood, until I was able then to share from, hey, this is now my experience and this works. Then I felt, well, I can start teaching some things because I'm now experiencing it. It took me years to get to the point, and no one would have known what was going on in my own personal walk with God, because I didn't tell anybody. There was no one to tell in reality, because I didn't understand most of it. In the sense, you look back and you see, oh, I've been on this journey. At that point, I was just where I was. I didn't know I was going anywhere different. And now I look back and think, oh yeah, now I can see exactly where God was taking me, can see exactly what these milestones were, what those battlegrounds were. It's like there's a map with footsteps all over it, which is the journey I've taken, and I can see the battles and the milestones along the way now. But when you're going through it, I couldn't see any of that. I was just grateful to take the next step. But yeah, it's keep going.
Well,
and the more experiences you share of when you've encountered these things and help other people to experience it, then the more they will then be saying, oh yeah, now I know, rather than, well, I'm listening to what you're saying, but I can't really say that I've experienced it myself. But more and more people will. And I think there's going to be a grace released to enable people to as well. I think greater authority is going to be there to help people come into it. And, we're seeing that all the time, really, which is good. Anyway.
Well, we're glad you made the journey, Mike.
Yep, we're thankful.
Yeah. Just a question before I lose you. What's a good email to contact you? I don't think I have one.
Mike@freedomarc.org. That's the best one. Okay.